So as we begin to deal with the economic fallout over coronavirus, Congress is now asking what kind of a bailout industry and workers may need.
Joining us now is journalist Aaron Glantz from Reveal. Aaron, great friend of the show. It's good to see you. Thanks for bearing with us in our new remote studio.
It's great to be with you.
Absolutely. Aaron, you and I were talking a little bit during the break. I want to quickly get your reaction. The White House is floating an $850 billion bailout package. I believe that is phase one. It includes a tax break and it includes money for the airline industry. Given your extensive experience talking about the 2008 bailouts and the subsequent effect on homeowners, what are some of the trends that you see right now with the current bailout package relative to 2008? And what do people who care about average Americans need to watch for very closely as all of this continues?
Well, I mean, I've been watching Steve Mnuchin very closely. This is the guy that the president has put in charge of the bailout, his Treasury Secretary, Steve Mnuchin, a vulture capitalist of the 2008 bailout, taking more than $1 billion in taxpayer subsidy as he and his colleagues foreclosed on over 100,000 families, including 23,000 seniors. Now, to say the fox is guarding the hen house is almost quaint when you have a guy who's put so much money in his own pocket from the last disaster relief and hurt homeowners in charge of crafting this one. And another member of the Trump team that we should keep an eye on right now is Wilbur Ross, who's the Commerce Secretary in charge of keeping international trade going. He's another vulture capitalist bankruptcy expert who took more than $1 billion in government bailout money during the last crisis as he foreclosed on tons of homes. And Wilbur Ross, when they tried to put restrictions on how we could use that bailout money, he wrote a very sternly worded letter to the FDIC, basically saying if they put any conditions on bailout money at all, he would not do business with the government anymore. Right. So these are the people who are negotiating these deals for Trump. And as you said, the details of the current plan are just coming in, but this is the framework that I'm viewing them through.
Yeah, it's so well said. And another thing that you've tracked very closely, Aaron, is how many people never really recovered from 2008 and how much personal debt, auto loan debt was lost that leaves people in such a precarious.
We are watching right now the stock market,
which
has tumbled tremendously. We are watching right now the stock market, which has trembled tremendously, as a result of the coronavirus. It's important for us to keep in mind that only 20% of Americans own any stock at all. And the average American has just $4,000 in the bank. And what this means is that people who are living paycheck to paycheck right now are going to be extremely vulnerable to everything that is coming their way. And so when we look at the relief package, we need to ask, what's in the relief package for people with no money in the bank who are losing their jobs and may not have enough money to go out and buy food or pay the rent? And we have much less of a cushion to fall back on, because as you mentioned, the 2008 financial crisis wiped out so much family wealth. There are 8 million Americans who lost their homes after the 2008 crash. The people who profited off of that, Steve Mnuchin, Wilbur Ross, other associates of Donald Trump writing the bailout package. But for those millions of families, the question for them is, what do they have to fall back on now that the coronavirus is hitting, and what is the government going to offer them?
Aaron, you've also been tracking the effect of the coronavirus on the VA and how this affects our veterans. What is happening right now with our veteran population, and are they going to get the health care that they need? What's going on right now?
This is another issue that I've done a lot of coverage of over the years. The VA healthcare system is the largest integrated healthcare system in the country. It serves 9 million American veterans a year. And guess what? They are exactly the demographic that is most vulnerable to the coronavirus.
Right.
You're talking people, a majority of whom are over the age of 65, nearly all of pre-existing conditions. Many of them have wounds of war, including respiratory conditions from being exposed to toxic chemicals in our wars that make them especially vulnerable to this virus. So we've been monitoring what is the VA doing across its 175 hospitals across the country. We've already had at least one death in the thing that concerns me is, like so much of the rest of the Trump administration, the VA has been mismanaged over the last few years. And the effect of this mismanagement is that there are 44,000 frontline healthcare vacancies at the VA, including thousands of doctors and nurses. And so the question is, as people come to the VA to seek help during this coronavirus, are there going to be enough bodies to help them?
Mm-hmm.
And Aaron, if you were advising the administration based on what you know about the economic fallout of 2008 and how cash-strapped consumers already were, what sorts of steps do you think that they should be taking right now? What we know of this package is it's money for the airline industry and a potential payroll tax cut. Is that enough, and what other measures would you consider?
Well, I mean, I think what we learned from the 2008 bailout is that time around, pretty much all the money went to people like Steve Mnuchin and Wilbur Ross, and almost none of the money went to regular people. In fact, the way it was constructed is that people like Steve Mnuchin and Wilbur Ross got money from the to foreclose on everyday families. So now we have families living paycheck to paycheck, trying to stay in their homes, wondering how they're going to pay their rent, how they're going to feed their family, quite literally, during a crisis that could go on for weeks and months. And, I care about the airline industry too. We need an airline industry, but let's talk about all these families who are, a payroll tax cut. Great for employers maybe, but if you're not getting a paycheck because you're not working, because you're like me, I'm sitting in San Francisco, we're not allowed to go outside the next 3 weeks. Then I don't know how much a payroll tax cut is going to help those gig workers and other people who are furloughed from their jobs. So I'm looking to see what the administration has planned for all the rest of us.
Right. And Aaron, I think that's the most important point that Crystal and I are trying to hammer home, which is that any future economic condition, we have the template for how they did it last time around. And with that template, we set the stage for a 10-year hollowing out of so much of the American middle and working class. And it seems that right now, the same conditions. I was joking with you during the break. This is real. The casino industry wants a federal bailout. Now, look, the casino industry does employ a lot of people in the service sector, restaurant, etc. But at the same time, I mean, this is not a critical sector of our economy. And if we don't structure this thing properly, then a lot of the money is just going to go to servicing debt. And it's not going to go to the actual workers that need the support in this time.
Well, Gavin Newsom here in California is encouraging cities to put a moratorium on evictions. We've had many utilities put a moratorium on electricity and water shutoffs during the crisis. Right. This is great. One of the things that these utilities and landlords are saying is, guess what? We may not evict you during the crisis. We may not shut off your water during the crisis, but you are still going to have to pay that bill. Right? That bill doesn't go away. So the question is, when those moratoriums, how are people going to pay their bill? And what is the government going to be doing to helping those families? And so, as you said, we have the template from the last crisis. The last crisis is give all the money to people like Steve Mnuchin and Wilbur Ross, right? So the question is, with Steve Mnuchin and Wilbur Ross running this bailout train, are they going to be crafting it in a way to specifically benefit themselves and their friends when they leave office, when Trump's time in office is over? This is something we have to be very, very, very concerned about. And they could do it, as you say, with debt, right? So that bailout to the casino industry, it could be structured in a way to benefit these Wall Street types, even more so perhaps in the casinos. So this is something, we don't want to say too much because we're just learning the details, but we have all the right questions.
Yeah.
Well, and I think, Aaron, your point is so well taken that it's not just whether or not certain industries get help, but it's the nature and the conditions that are put on that help. Sara Nelson, who's a friend of the show and president of the Flight Attendants Union, has been saying, okay, help the airline industry, require them to make sure that they're paying our workers and keeping our workers employed. Don't let them engage in these stock buybacks that have left them cash strapped at a time when they should be completely flush. I mean, that's one of the things that's outrageous here, is that so many of these companies, when given a massive tax break And in a time of economic prosperity, rather than saving, rather than investing in their workforce, rather than doing any of those things, they engaged in stock buybacks so that they are loaded up with debt and in this precarious position because of their own irresponsible behavior to start with.
We need to talk also about transparency here. How transparent is the government going to be with the way this bailout money is spent? Now, the last bailout that we had in 2008, we've been talking mostly about all the money that went to Wall Street. There was also President Obama's stimulus package. That was almost $1 trillion. And it was a combination of tax cuts, aid to state and local government, and like grants to art, everything from arts programs to individual families in a time of need. I got a benefit from the stimulus. They gave me some money to buy my house, which allowed me to weather the recession. So a lot of good happened with that stimulus. And one of the things that was very important to President Obama at the time was transparency. So investigative reporters like myself were able to go in and judge how well that was working. We found some parts of that stimulus worked quite well, other parts not so much. We were able to reveal corruption in parts of the stimulus. So I was on the phone just a day or two ago with the leader of the Small Business Administration. The Trump administration wants to make a gigantic multi-billion-dollar loan program available to small businesses to keep them afloat. I asked some questions. How are we going to follow how this money is going out the door? How are we going to be able to judge if all parts of the country and all parts of our communities are treated fairly? I've done a lot of journalism on redlining about how banks cut people of color out of their lending practices. Are there going to be safeguards in place with this giant SBA lending program to make sure that our ethnic businesses receive support the same way as those owned by white business owners in white neighborhoods? And I didn't get any answer back on transparency, which is understandable because we're all racing here. But it is something that we really need to keep in mind before all that money goes out the door.
Yeah, and we're going to make sure that we have you on throughout the crisis to make sure that you can track it for us. Aaron, thank you so much for joining us, updating our audience. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, and all the best to you in Washington.
Thanks, guys. We'll have more Rising for you right after this.